Today's scripture reading is from Luke chapter 4. When he came to the village of Nazareth, his boyhood home, he went as usual to the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read the scriptures. The scroll of Isaiah the prophet was handed to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where this was written. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come. He rolled up the scroll, handed it back to the attendant, and sat down. All eyes in the synagogue looked at him intently. Then he began to speak to them. The scripture you've just heard has been fulfilled this very day. Everyone spoke well of him and was amazed by the gracious words that came from his lips. How can this be, they asked. Isn't this Joseph's son? Then he said, you will undoubtedly quote me this proverb. Physician, heal yourself, meaning do miracles here in your hometown like those you did in Capernaum. But I tell you the truth, no prophet is accepted in his own hometown. Certainly there were many needy widows in Israel in Elijah's time when the heavens were closed for 3.5 years and a severe famine devastated the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them. He was sent instead to a foreigner, a widow of Zarephath in the land of Sidon. And many in Israel had leprosy in that time of the prophet Elisha, but the only one healed was Naaman, a Syrian. When they heard this, the people in the synagogue were furious. Jumping up, they mobbed him and forced him to the edge of the hill on which the town was built. They intended to push him over the cliff, but he passed right through the crowd and went on his way. Then Jesus went to Capernaum, a town in Galilee, and taught there in the synagogue every Sabbath day.
We crank on. Week 3, Landon got me with a modified video first service. I didn't know, so I stood here awkwardly, like, waiting for the thing to... Anyway, this is week 3 in a series I'm calling Jack in the Box. If you haven't been here, the idea is pretty simple, right? Your life is like a Jack in the Box. Think of it that way. Every day you get up, and the world starts cranking your handle, right? You know, had a fight with your spouse. He said something insensitive. Kids won't listen to anything you say. They left their dishes in the sink. That person put some inflammatory political post online. Your in-laws just showed up unannounced, right? And eventually, I love my in-laws, just kidding. Eventually, whatever's inside of you is going to come out, right? Here's the hard truth, okay? And this is true of me too. So every message is this way, but certainly today. Here's the truth. When you get up and life starts cranking your handle, and bad stuff comes out of you, it's because you're a bad person. It's okay to just acknowledge. I'm not talking like totally, like everything about you is bad. I'm just saying like when bad stuff comes out of you, it's because bad stuff is in you. And we all have bad stuff in there. And so when life cranks our handle, like a bad tree producing bad fruit, we respond in ways that are not okay, unloving. And so what this series is about is how do we try to cultivate a sort of inner world that isn't quite so bad, so that maybe when life cranks our handle, and we might surprise ourselves, maybe reflexively and naturally what comes out of us is actually good stuff, love. And there are things that you can do. Your character isn't entirely unlike your biceps or your lawn or your financial portfolio or your pickleball game. There are things you can do to grow. You can't control it entirely. That's our next series. We're going to talk about things that only God can do, and you have to rely on God to do them. But there are things that you can do. And so this series is about what kind of character do we need in order to love well, meaning what kind of virtues do you have to be characterized by, and what can you do to develop them? So last week we talked about the virtue of wisdom. Sometimes that's called the charioteer of the virtues, because you need wisdom to know how to use the rest of them properly. Today we're going to talk about justice, and you will see here in a few minutes why justice is so critical to loving well. It might not be readily apparent to you because when I say justice, the way that you are likely to think about it as just a contemporary Westerner, someone who has grown up in American culture, when you think of justice, you probably think justice is some kind of legal concept that has something to do with kind of retribution or paying back, right? That we see this on the news all the time. Someone does some terrible thing, and we want to catch them, and we want to punish them, and only when we've caught them and we've punished them do we say what? Justice is served. Like, that's our concept. We think justice is a kind of payment for wrongdoing, that you've done a wrong thing, and therefore you deserve to be hurt in some kind of commensurate way. That's what we think justice is. We assume, I think wrongly, we assume that we derive that from the character of God, that God is someone who does this. It's very common for Christian people, especially in the kind of evangelical circles where I came of age in my Christian faith, to hear people say things like, God is just. And because God is just, God can't just forgive sins. So we think justice is payment for evil. That's our definition of justice. We think we get that from God. What we've actually done is we've imported it onto God. So we take our definition of justice, we put that on God, and we say, well, because God is just, God has to punish evil. And in fact, for a lot of Christian people, that's how they grow up thinking about Jesus' death. That because of my sin, because of the evil I do in my life, I deserve to be punished for that. But thank God that God punished somebody else in my place. And God had to do that because God is just, so God has to punish wrongdoing. I think that's a misunderstanding of the character of God, and I think it's based on a misunderstanding of what justice actually is. Justice is much bigger, much more comprehensive, and much more difficult than just paying somebody for wrongdoing. In the Hebrew Scriptures in the Old Testament, the word justice is almost always coupled with the word righteousness. So wherever you see the word justice, you will almost always see it as a couplet. It's justice and righteousness. Like when God first calls Abram, the patriarch of the people of Israel, he says, Abraham is going to lead my people into justice and righteousness. There's a reason those two words are coupled together. Righteousness, again, because you grew up in the same world that I've grown up in, probably when you hear a word like righteous or righteousness, you almost certainly think I'm talking about a character trait. Something like piety or holiness. That is not what righteousness means. Righteousness means right-usness. Righteousness is a way of living in the world where you do right by other people. It is living rightly with other people. You are a righteous person if you are always living rightly with other people. The reason justice is always coupled with righteousness is because you don't live rightly with other people all the time, and neither do I. Justice is any action, the purpose of which is to either maintain right relationship with other people or to fix it when it's gone wrong. If you know the God from whom all goodness and rightness flows, then it is assumed that the most important thing in your life is to live rightly with other people. Your spouse, your kids, your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, your enemies. So the most important thing in your life, this is assumed. If you know the God from whom all goodness and rightness flows, the God revealed in Jesus Christ, the most important thing to you, it's not your retirement savings, it's not being right, it's not making sure that your political party gets voted into office, it is not getting rich, it is not having power, it is not being known. the most important thing to you is supposed to be living rightly with all people. Now, because you and I are sinful people, we're not going to do that perfectly, not all the time. So justice. Justice is your commitment to do what you need to do, to make sure that you're living rightly with people, or to kind of restore that kind of rightness if it's broken in some way. Now, sometimes that kind of justice sometimes involves punishment. Because God never does wrong, which is to say God always does right by us or always treats us rightly, God doesn't have to do anything to like fix or repair something that he has screwed up in some way. But because God is the author of all creation, a creation that is supposed to reflect his goodness and rightness, sometimes God does have to get involved in our lives. The purpose of that involvement is always to turn us back to justice and righteousness, right living or just acts that restore right living. Sometimes that means punishment. Like the most glaring example of this in the Hebrew scriptures is Pharaoh. Many of you know this story. The Egyptians enslaved the Hebrew people for 400 years. Okay? It's not okay to enslave people. Right? Taking people, owning them, mistreating them, taking somebody made in the image of God and dominating them, that's not right living. And so God, through a prophet named Moses, steps into Pharaoh's world. And you notice what God does. It isn't like God comes in guns blazing. Moses, who has a speech impediment, rolls into town, and there's like a sequence of things like, watch my staff become a snake. How about that? You think you can let him go now? No? Okay. We'll turn a little water into blood. How about that? You think now maybe? No? Okay. How about frogs? How about locusts? How about blight? How about hail? How about darkness? Over and over and over and over again, Moses keeps coming back to Pharaoh. And the point is to turn Pharaoh, to get Pharaoh to acknowledge, I'm doing the wrong thing here. I am not living rightly with these people, and I need to stop it and do what's right. Pharaoh persists, and this is a terribly sad reality, that you can persist. You can persist in a hard heart and a stiff neck until the only thing that's left is pain and suffering to try to get you to turn. It's a terrible day when that is required. When you are so stubborn and obstinate in your refusal to do what is right, that the only tool left in the bag is to hurt you in the hopes that maybe that's the last-ditch effort that will get you to open your eyes and do what you're supposed to do. It's a terrible day, and that's what happens to Pharaoh. We look at that, and because of our misunderstanding of justice, we think Pharaoh's getting what he deserves. That's not what's happening to Pharaoh. Pharaoh, unfortunately, is getting what Pharaoh needs. And it's just a terrible day that what he needs is pain and suffering. But justice does not always require that kind of punishment. It didn't require punishment for Joseph's brothers. You know that story? Joseph has 11 siblings, one younger brother, 10 older. They don't like Joseph much. They think he's kind of arrogant. And so they decide they're going to murder him. One brother says, hey, let's not do that. Maybe let's just throw him in a well instead and walk away. And then they say, no, I got a better idea. Let's sell him off to that band of traders, and they'll take him off to Egypt, and he'll just disappear. And so that's what they do. They sell their brother into slavery, and then they go home and they lie to their father about it. Sorry, Dad. I know he's your favorite, but he must have gotten mauled by some vicious animal. Decades go by. Decades go by. And as it turns out, Joseph's doing actually pretty well. He gets promoted into a pretty prominent position, and as fate would have it, a famine hits the land, and Joseph's brothers have to come down to Egypt in order to get grain so they don't starve to death. And who's in charge? Joseph. And Joseph's pretty calculated. He does a couple of pretty cool things for the purpose of trying to figure out if they've changed. He steals their youngest brother, his only full-blood sibling, Benjamin, and he keeps him. And the reason he keeps him is he wants to see what his brothers are going to do. Are they going to come back for him like they didn't come back for me? Are they going to sacrifice their lives for him the way they didn't sacrifice their lives for me? Are they going to honor their dad and do what they said they would do like they didn't do with me? And they do. They didn't have to be punished for that. At least not in the way we think about punishment. The punishment they experienced, I imagine, was when they came home and lied to their father about Joseph, and they watched their dad have to grieve that news, and they knew they were lying about it. That's probably a hard thing to live with. And then to spend the next 20 years of your life holding that secret in, and the guilt and the shame that would create, that can't be easy to live with. And it changed them. Guilt and shame can do that. So that when they had the opportunity to do what was right, they did it. And nobody had to punish them to make that happen. Same thing happened with David. When David did an inappropriate thing with Bathsheba, nobody had to punish him from the outside. The prophet Nathan comes to him, crafts a story, kind of comes in the back door, so to speak. David realizes that you're telling a story about me, and he repents. He's brokenhearted about it. Justice is not giving people what they deserve. That is not what justice is. Justice is a commitment to doing what's ever needed in order to restore yourself and other people to right living. Sometimes that requires punishment, and that's a sad day, but it doesn't always. And you know that. If you have kids, you know that. You don't have to punish your kids' wrongdoing. Sometimes you do, because in your wisdom, you believe it's necessary in order to help them learn and grow. But there are plenty of times in your life where you can clearly see punishment isn't going to make this any better. They've already learned their lesson. They've already been changed because of something else. So sometimes punishment is involved in justice, but sometimes it's not. One way to think about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is God trying to produce in you justice and righteousness without pain and suffering being required. So in this passage you heard just a minute ago, Jesus' public ministry has started, word is spreading, crowds are starting to show up. Jesus decides to swing through his hometown. He wants to say hi to mom, see some friends. And as was his custom, Jesus was a religious guy. He went to church regularly. So he goes to synagogue, and he gets to synagogue, and I don't know if he anticipated this was going to happen, but the local rabbi or synagogue attendant says, "Hey, Jesus, you're starting to get a bit of a reputation. Would you mind teaching today?" Jesus is like, well, I suppose. I don't have a sermon plan, but I guess, okay. And so he says, okay, well, here are all the scrolls. Here are all the Torah scrolls. Here's all the scrolls that are available to you. You go ahead and pick whatever you want. And Jesus says, okay, I'll take the scroll of Isaiah. And then he opens the scroll of Isaiah, and he finds his way to a specific passage. Isaiah, among all the prophets, is the one where the theme of justice is most prominent. It was not coincidental. And he scrolls open to this place that he knows, because this is his hometown. He knows these people. He knows their fears. He knows their aspirations. He knows their deepest desires. This is where he grew up. He picks a passage he knows is going to tap into something very deep in them, this deep yearning and longing for justice. The problem is their understanding of justice has become kind of like our understanding of justice has become. What they most long for is a deliverance from oppression. For them, it was the Romans. They want the same kind of deliverance that their Hebrew ancestors got from Pharaoh. And I'm guessing, if I'm putting myself in their sandals, I'm guessing someone in that room wants the Romans to get a little taste of what Pharaoh got. I don't want to just be delivered. No. I want the Romans to get what they deserve in the process. Jesus knows that's how they think about things. How many dinner table conversations, how many campfire conversations, how many trips to Jerusalem had he listened to the adults in his life talking about, the day. Can't wait for the day when God finally gives them what they deserve. He knows that's how they think about things. And so he reads the passage. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to give sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free. Those who are in captive are going to be released. This is the day of the Lord's favor. And everyone in the room is going, yes. He finishes reading, puts the scroll back. He sits down. Everyone in the room is now, I wonder what he's going to say. It's like their favorite passage. I wonder what he's going to say. And he says, hey, good news, everybody. This is exactly what I came to do. I'm the guy you've been waiting for. This is what God sent me to do. And you notice the story says everybody spoke well of him. It's like, could it be? No, that can't be. This is Joseph's kid. I mean, we've known him since he was a baby. Is it possible? Could this really be happening? I mean, we know he's performed. He's performed miracles. Could this be true? You see, Jesus is, and this is a classic kind of prophetic move. He is just kind of reeling them in, stoking that misunderstanding, so that he can do what prophets do. I heard someone say once that the number one job of a leader is to force you to see the things that you're working very hard not to see. That's a great definition of a prophet. The prophetic job is to get you to see things you don't want to see, that you're working very hard not to see. And the way that Jesus does this, he knows what real justice is, and he knows they don't know what it is. And if they did know what it was, they wouldn't be nearly as excited about it as they are about their definition of justice. And so to get them to realize that, he draws a couple stories out of their past. Famous stories everyone in the room knew. Hey, guys, remember the time when your ancestors were starving? It was a terrible famine. It lasted like 2.5 years. There was no food, remember? This is like your great-grandma. And God sent the prophet Elijah. Remember that? How many of your ancestors did the prophet Elijah feed? None? Who did he feed? Oh, he fed a widow from the region of Sidon, which, by the way, was like their sworn enemy. Remember the time that all of our ancestors were like inflicted with leprosy, this terrible disease? Do you remember that? Do you remember how much they suffered? And God sent the prophet Elisha. How many of your ancestors did he heal? None? Who did he heal? Oh, he healed a foreign warlord, like the general of the army that conquered you. You can imagine what's going on in the room. Blood's starting to boil a little bit. People are starting to sweat, grit their teeth. Because somewhere inside of you, you know you're beginning to realize the thing that you're supposed to realize, and you don't like it, that is when you grit your teeth. There are 2 times you grind your teeth: when you sleep at night and when someone says something you don't like but you know is true. They're grinding their teeth. They're angry because they know what Jesus is saying. What he's saying is, you don't actually care about the kind of justice that springs from the heart of God. If you did, you would be thrilled that he fed a widow from Sidon. You'd be thrilled that he healed Naaman. Because those acts of compassion turned those people, turned them around. They became worshipers of God. They started living rightly because of what God did in their lives. That's not what you care about. You don't want them to turn around. You want them to get what they deserve. But that's not what God does. And you notice what they do. This is how you know Jesus is right. Because no sooner do the words come out of his mouth and they grab him and they drag him outside and they want to throw him off a cliff. Right? So much for justice. I don't know, careful how I say this. I'm concerned. I'm concerned that not many Christians are much better. I think many of us have been raised on a steady diet of believing that justice is other people getting what they deserve. And I think somewhere deep inside of us, that's what we want most. We don't actually want people to get what they need so that they change. We just want people to get what they deserve or what we think they deserve. When we come to church every week, you know, Jesus once referred to his church, his temple, as a den of thieves. Part of the reason he did that was because there was actual thievery going on in the temple. But a den isn't a place where you do the thieving. A den is a place where you go to hide after you've done it. I think a lot of Christians come to church every week to hide. And by hide, I mean pretend. I mean pretend to care about the things God cares about, which is living rightly with him and living rightly with people. And then we go out into the world and we say and we think and we do all kinds of things to harm other people. Or we don't say, don't think, don't do all the things that we need to do to restore relationships once we've broken them. And then when the week's over, we come back and we pretend. We pretend that what's really the most important thing to us is living rightly with people when it is not. That's the thing that Jesus was trying to get them to see, and they hated him for it. But if you're going to love well, if you're going to love the way that Jesus calls you to love, it doesn't take a theology degree to know that the most important thing to you has to be living rightly with people. It's not how many tournaments you win. It's not how you ascend the ladder at work. It's not how much money you make. It can't be any of those things. The thing that is supposed to be most important to you is living rightly with other human beings. And that means a willingness to do whatever you have to do to maintain that rightness or to fix it if you've done something to break it. Because that's what justice is. It is a commitment to human beings. Now, let me give you one habit as I close this morning. Let me give you one habit, and 4 temptations. I wish I could have come up with an acronym, but there's no word in the English language for the letters that I have to work with. 1 habit. Again, this is about cultivating justice. How do you do this proactively in your life? I'm not saying I'm good at this. I always preach to myself first. But it is a habit that the more I do it, the more effective it becomes. Your habit is to always ask yourself, who's on the other side of this decision? And if I make this decision, does it mean I'm living rightly with that person? There is always a person on the other side of your choices. I don't care how private you think those choices are. Somebody's on the other side of it. So to ask yourself before you make the choice, is this living rightly with that person? And if it's not, don't do that thing. Should you throw a raging kegger at your house while your parents are out of town? Would that be living rightly with your parents? No. Then don't do that. Should you make a decision without your spouse's consent and then hide it from them? Would that be living rightly with your spouse? No. Then don't do that. Should you spend 3 hours at work watching YouTube videos? Would that be living rightly with your employer? No, don't do that. Should you not pay your employees a living wage or medical benefits so that you can put more money in your pocket? Is that living rightly with your employees? No, it's not. So don't do that. The more you and I, and again, I'm preaching to myself here, the more you and I can take a step back and go, wait a minute, there's somebody on the other side of this choice. And it doesn't matter if they don't find out about it. It doesn't matter if they don't know. Someone's on the other side of this decision, and if I make it, am I living rightly with that person? And if the answer is no, don't do it. That's your habit. Every day, you got 1,000 decisions you make. Try to ask yourself, what if I make this? Am I living rightly with that other person? Here are your temptations. Ready? Rapid fire. 1, avoid greed. It's okay to have and it's okay to have more. It is not okay to want more. To incessantly want more, you are going to have to hurt somebody to get it. It's okay to have more. If you do the right things in the right way for the right reasons and it ends up with you having more, okay. But if you find it in your soul that you are wanting more all the time, kill it. Kill that impulse as quickly as you can. Avoid greed of any kind. Power. If you happen to be in a position of power, if you have authority over other people, this could be parent-child, this could be boss-employee, right? If you happen to be in a position of power and authority, avoid at every turn using your power and authority to get what you want. Leverage your position of power and authority to help the people who are below you, to serve them, to set them up so that they can succeed. If you perceive that that's being taken advantage of, then have the conversations that you need to have to make sure that justice and righteousness are flowing in both directions. But don't use your power and authority to dominate people. So avoid greed, avoid power, avoid violence. Obviously, we all know that that means avoid being physically violent. It also means avoid loving violence. And we all should probably be honest, there's a part of us that loves violence. I love watching movies where the bad guys get it in the end, like violently get it in the end. There's something in our souls that loves violence. We are called to be peacemaking, peaceable people. That is not always possible without physical coercion, but we are not to be people who love violence. We are certainly not to be people who kind of whimsically endorse it when all of the other means of coercion have not been exhausted first. Just like God with Pharaoh. When you find welling up in you a desire to harm, which I realize most of you are never going to actually do, but when you feel it inside of you, you've got to kill that. Avoid greed, avoid power, avoid violence, and you got to avoid exclusion. And what I mean by exclusion is not everybody should get to participate in everything. That's not what I mean. That's completely incoherent. I think we all understand you can't have a group for battered women if you're going to let men come. Okay, it's like you can't, letting everybody participate in everything eliminates all the categories that anybody could be a part of. So that's what I'm talking about. When I say exclusion, I mean excluding somebody from the sphere of God's compassion and care. We are excellent at this. It's how many of us have built our faith. Maybe unbeknownst to us, but many of us have constructed a faith that is built on the assumption, I am in, they are out. I have done the right things, they have not. I believe the right things, they don't. The consequence of that is there are people who are essentially outside of the sphere of God's care. And when you start to go down that road, whole parts of your soul will just die. Here's how I know this. Today, many of you are going to leave here, and you're going to go to lunch, and you're going to be sitting there eating your grilled cheese sandwich, and around you is going to be all kinds of people that you don't know. And statistically speaking, the way that many Christians think about this is that all of those people around you, statistically, they're probably going to spend the rest of eternity in a bad place. Because they don't know Jesus and they haven't said all the right things and they don't believe all the right things. And you're going to sit there and do nothing about it. You're going to nibble on your sandwich and you're going to ladle your soup and you're going to look at your social media and you're going to joke with each other about something that's totally meaningless. Meanwhile, essentially, the building is burning to the ground around you. Now, how you got there, so you didn't even know, but how you got there was at some point way back when you allowed yourself to believe that some people are in and some people are out, and it just started to deaden you inside. So that you can actually go around the world and you can look at other people and sort of consciously in your brain say, man, stinks to be them. And then just go about your business. You have to avoid this tendency to want to exclude in that way, to build a spirituality that is largely about defensiveness, largely about contamination and keeping yourself clean and pure and right. That is the kind of impulse that will get you where these people got. I told you a minute ago that one way to think about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is that he came to turn us to himself and to one another. And the way that he does that is not by punishing us for our wrongdoing, but allowing us to punish him. They tried to throw him off a cliff that day. He didn't let them do that on that particular day. But he would let them do that on another particular day. There would come a day when he would let them make good on that threat. And they would crucify him, believing they were doing the right thing, the good thing, the necessary, the just thing. But 3 days later, God raised him from the dead. And that is supposed to be the in-your-face truth that will set you free. You and I, sinful as we are, we murdered the Son of God. Maybe we didn't know we were doing it, but we did it. And when Jesus comes back from the dead, we know we did it. And what that's supposed to do in your soul is it's supposed to go, oh, yeah, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to be a part of that. So I need to live rightly with people. Because the last time I didn't, I crucified God. If you're going to love the way that Jesus calls you to love, you have to cultivate this kind of justice in your soul. Living right with people and doing what you need to do to fix it when we've broken it. We're going to finish our service this morning by taking communion together. If you're newer to our church and you haven't done this before, in just a minute, I'll invite everybody to stand. You can come forward. Our communion tables are on the sides of our stage here. You'll just take a prepackaged communion cup back to your seat using our side aisles, and then you can take that during this last song as you feel led. But this is a sacrament of remembrance. When you come forward and you take the bread that represents Jesus' broken body and the juice that represents his shed blood, you're remembering. God is just. You got that right. That does not mean God must punish evil. God's justice allows you to punish him. God turns you to him and to one another through compassion if you'll let him. That's the God we believe in and love and worship. And when we take these elements, it is also the life that we're participating in. You are going to be people who leave here this week, and as best you can in the power of the Holy Spirit, you are going to live rightly with the people in your life, because that's who you are. That is your best self. And if for some reason you break it, you fix it. You do what you need to do to restore that rightness, because that's who God is and that's who God has made you to be. If that's the life you want to live, then that's the table you come to. A table full of people you don't know, who don't think the way you think and live the way you live or believe what you believe, and they're hard to get along with. And the only way to come to that table is if you're committed to them and making things right. You want to live that way, then come. Come to the table. I invite you to stand. Let me pray for us. God, we recognize you as a God of justice. Thank you. Thank you that does not mean giving us what we deserve. We're so grateful that you give us what we need. Most importantly, the life, death, and resurrection of your Son, Jesus Christ, and your very Spirit to come and live inside of us. Continue to turn us to yourself, that we would be committed to living rightly with one another. And when we make mistakes, to seek your grace and to take the steps, the just steps that we need to take so that we can restore those relationships. We love you and we thank you. We entrust ourselves to you as we come to the table this morning in Jesus' name. Amen.
Fill us up, stepping forward. Keep us from just singing, move us into action. We must go.